all improvement is mediated through changes in your relationship with perceived effort. And there are two things you can do. You can either increase your perceived effort tolerance, so you're just able to dig deeper and suffer more, or you can reduce the level of perceived effort that you feel at any given level of output. That's how all the physical stuff works.
We are here because we know the outcomes in our lives are within our control. That taking absolute ownership of how we eat, sleep, train, think, and connect with each other is how we'll optimize our health and happiness. That chasing excellence is how we grab hold of what is possible. Our mission is to live on the run, always chasing, never stopping. Hello. Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode of Chasing Excellence. Patrick here, just recording a quick introduction to today's episode. Today we have writer, coach, nutritionist Matt Fitzgerald on the show. I was not able to join Ben from this conversation, but very excited to introduce you to Matt. You may recognize Matt's name in an episode we recorded a couple months ago. Ben recommended his book titled How Bad Do You Want It? And called it and now a must read for his athletes. So we wanted to have Matt on the show to talk a little bit more about his work, about that book. And I think you're going to enjoy the conversation. You can learn more about Matt at mattfitzgerald.org. He's the author of, to my count, 25 or 27 books, including How Bad Do You Want It? So do go check him out if this conversation is intriguing to you. Here's the interview.
All right, Matt, super psyched to have you on the show. Your work, your book, How Bad Do You Want It, was something I've shared with all of my athletes. It's like a must read now, and it put a lot of language to stuff that I've been working with my coaches for quite some time. But it's a cool, interesting take. So as opposed to what we see in a lot of sports psychology books, where it's like set goals and it's kind of like that outside of training aspect. It's like what you do like in your living room. Your approach and your stories. I mean, first off, the book is so captivating. I know it's not your only book. I know you've written how many, 4 or 5 books?
More than that. Okay,
there we go. And I know that you're not just limited to this psychological aspect as well, but it's certainly a thing that we talk about a lot. It's the thing I talk about with my athletes a lot. And this psychobiological model. Can you just, maybe we'll start there because I think it's a framework for a good leaping off point.
Sure thing. Yeah. So that it's a mouthful, isn't it? Psychobiological. The term was coined by an Italian exercise physiologist named Samuele Marcora. And it's based on, actually, he's an exercise physiologist, but it's actually based on an older psychological theory known as motivational intensity theory. And Marcora's interest is like, why do people stop when they stop? If you have, especially in the endurance context, like if you have athletes go until they can't, like what is the can't? And for decades, it was assumed, just because, scientists tend to privilege the material, the body, it was assumed that some kind of, catastrophic, physiological event occurred, like just, levels of blood lactate that the muscles could no longer function. Marcora's like, no. People just quit. It's so much simpler than that. And he didn't just come up with that idea out of nowhere. Like, for the longest time, scientists could not find what that hard limit was. They had all these candidates, but when they actually tried to test, is it glycogen depletion? Is it, a thermoregulatory breakdown? None of these things could explain it. Basically, anytime athletes actually did quit, they were fine physically. Like there was no physical reason they had to quit. And so Marcora based his psychobiological model on this theory of motivational intensity, which it was meant to apply to general psychology, but Marcora's advance was just to apply it to the exercise context. And what he said was, based on this theory, people go into any difficult task with a fixed level of motivational intensity, which means they're only willing to put in so much effort or suffer so much to achieve a goal. And if in the pursuit of that goal, one of two things will happen. Either they'll accomplish it or they will exceed that what's known as potential motivation. So for the endurance athlete, if you get 23 miles into a marathon and you're like, I did not sign up for this, I knew it was going to be hard, but this is too hard. You may slow down at that point just because it doesn't feel worth it. And you may actually feel like you have encountered a hard physical limit, but except in rare cases, you haven't.
So this is like, obviously it's the mind over matter, mind over muscle aspect to, the mental toughness component to it, which is why I'm so fascinated by it. How much of this, so if we were to take this to the extremes, it's essentially saying it's all mental. But as you said, like glycogen depletion, whether it's lactic buildup or whatever it is, how much can somebody actually work through, right? So if somebody actually gets like stress fractures, or somebody like, is the psychobiological model basically saying like the body's going to follow the mind? And like, if you train the mind hard enough, well enough, efficiently enough, I don't know what the right words are, that those breakdowns don't occur. It's because at some level, it seems to me like, I don't want it to be true, but I feel like at some level there has to be some sort of physical breakdown. Is this saying that no, it's not physical, and like literally your mind is the mechanism that controls the physical?
Yes, I mean, it's nuanced, right? So take something like a short sprint, like the 40-yard dash, that football players do in the combine and whatever. Obviously, like there's no pacing element there, and fatigue is not a limiter. You're going all out from the start. But what if you extend it from 40 yards to 100 meters? And then from 100 meters to 200 meters. If you keep increasing the race distance, you're going to get to a point where in order to reach the finish line as quickly as possible, you can't start the race with an all-out effort. And in fact, you can't be going all out until maybe you're within 40 yards of the finish line. And then you can let it all hang out, whatever you've got left. So, that's what distinguishes a sprint from any type of endurance thing. And it really, that threshold is pretty short. It's like anything above about 45 seconds, you have to pace in order to. So pacing is done by feel. It is done by perception. So perception of effort really rules any paced type of exercise bout. And that's just the fact of the matter. Like, obviously data can help. If you've got a watch telling you how far you've gone, how fast you're going, you can key off that, but there's been a lot of science showing that it doesn't really matter, especially if you're experienced. You do it by feel, and so you're basically limited by feel. If you run, to go back to my marathon example, if you cross the finish line of a marathon, and maybe you've run 10 marathons and that's your best one ever, there's no way to look back on that race and guarantee that you couldn't have gone any faster, just because of the nature of it. So, anyone can let it all hang out when they see the finish line. So that's really when an endurance test becomes a sprint. So sure, you can be limited by purely physical factors at the very end of anything, but fundamentally, anything that is even remotely sustained is you're limited by perceptions.
So love that. We talk about perception on so many different facets here, right down to the cellular level to life fulfillment, happiness. But certainly it carries so much weight inside of the endurance world and in our sport. So it matters even more so in our sport than it does in most track and field or cross-country endurance events, because our events are always unknown. Every time we're entering an event, it is a different event. So there's no way of truly knowing your pace because it's truly a new event. So for someone to say your maximal sustainable pace, your lactic threshold is at this wattage, this minutes per mile, this speed, is absurd because it's a totally unknown. So what we ask our athletes to do all the time is to come really in tune with that feel, that perceived effort of exertion. And you have this really beautiful metaphor, which is the fire walker. I don't want to steal the thunder because that's the page that's in my book that literally is that's the one dog-eared page that is so powerful that can you kind of walk through the fire walker analogy?
Yeah, I mean, the science here can get, I'm not a scientist myself, so I need these metaphors to make it understandable to myself, and I figure a lot of other people. So I'm trying to boil down the science to a metaphor we can all relate to. Not that we've all firewalked before, but the idea is that, when you start any type of maximal performance test, it's like doing a firewalk of a fixed length, and there's a wall at the end of it. So the wall represents your goal, and the wall also represents your ultimate physical limit. And so you start the firewalk, and at first you're like, that's hot, that's uncomfortable, but you keep going because you can tolerate it. The further into that walk you get, now that pain that you're feeling from the hot colds on your feet, that represents your rising level of perceived effort. No matter what intensity you're trying to sustain, the longer you sustain it, the more uncomfortable it's going to become. So you're walking along, trying to reach that wall that represents your final physical limit. At some point, everyone jumps off the coals. Like no one, what I'm saying is anything that's like an endurance test by nature, you can't reach the wall. So the wall is actually fixed. I mean, if you could reach it, that would be at the end of the story. You would never improve because the wall is the wall. But that point at which you jump off the coals, that's mutable, which it's a limit that is kind of fuzzy. All kinds of things can allow you to that really becomes the task as an athlete. You're trying to close the distance between that perceptual limit when you jump off the coals and that unreachable final physical limit that in fact you'll never get to.
And the goal then of training then becomes creating coping mechanisms to allow you to stay on the coals long. That as an endurance athlete, that ultimately becomes the goal, right? How long, like what are the coping mechanisms? And whether that's more volume or more threshold training or more mental work, that's right. Is that kind of the thesis, the hypothesis that all this training then becomes just coping?
Yeah. A helpful way to look at it is that all improvement is mediated through changes in your relationship with perceived effort. And there are two things you can do. You can either increase your perceived effort tolerance, so you're just able to dig deeper and suffer more, or you can reduce the level of perceived effort that you feel at any given level of output. That's how all the physical stuff works. If you start off as a couch potato, you train for 8 weeks, and on day one, running an 8-minute mile feels like the hardest thing in the world. And after 8 weeks, you can hold a conversation at an 8-minute mile. What's happened there is because you've increased your physical capacity, an 8-minute mile feels easier. So you can run more of them, or you could go faster at what was previously, an uncomfortable effort level. So even the stuff that you think of as purely physical is mediated through perception of effort. So that, if you got fitter, but things didn't feel easier, you couldn't actually use that increased fitness because it would not feel easier. But of course, it doesn't work that way.
Yeah, I like that. That gives a little bit more context because I think there's this confusion, and particularly in our sport, probably more than others, because CrossFit is like, you've seen the YouTube videos where it's like go till you pass out and you're a puddle on the floor, and that's not what our sport is. But there's a big misconception about it, and I think that what a lot of people do is they have the first piece of what you alluded to, which is try to push into the pain cave, right? Like you get there and how long can you stay here and can you move farther? So once the coals are searing, that's where it all happens. But I like the second aspect to that because it gives credence to what all endurance athletes know, which is training at lower intensities, which what you said is like at this intensity, what you're trying to do is maintain the intensity. And through exposures, you're going to drop the perceived effort. It's not necessarily just moving your tolerance for perceived effort. It's also, so give a real world example for me that might not be following along with this. If you can run if your PR is a 6-minute mile, there's more than one way to improve your PR other than just running at race pace. It's not all about just running 1:30 400s or even 1:25 or 1:15 400s. you can hang out at a 7-minute or even an 8-minute and go longer. And what you're trying to do is over time lower the perceived effort, a rate of exertion from say a 4, 5, or a 6 at an 8-minute mile to a 2 or a 3. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, and it's it's you need more than one tool, because the concepts, once they're properly explained, they are pretty simple. But what a lot of people want is they want one tool to be able to do it all. Oh, I just got to be tougher. And yeah, you need to be tough, but that's not gonna get you to the promised land.
So speaking of tough, like how would you define toughness or mental toughness? What is there a difference between the two?
I always prefer, there is such a thing as mental toughness, but I think a lot of people conflate mental toughness with mental fitness. Mental fitness is my preferred term for the full toolkit. And so mental fitness is the envelope and mental toughness is one of the ingredients. And, it's the one that gets all the attention, but definitely, in my work as a coach all the time, I deal with athletes who they're tough enough, but they're not smart enough. And, you see it with the ones who, especially they want working harder to be the answer to everything.
Yeah.
There's actually kind of a laziness there. It's like, I don't want to have to figure this out. I don't want to have to adapt or be flexible or learn. I just want to I want to fall back on toughness no matter what the problem is. So that's a little lazy. Like, again, you need to be tough, but that's not all you need to be.
Can you give a little more context? I love that, Matt. I love as a coach, love that, because I see it all the time is the answer is just work harder. And I'm always trying to get people to your words there is like to smarter training, smarter racing. Can you give some examples of that? What does it mean to be a smarter athlete? Because that might be, some people might look at that as an oxymoron, like there's the dumb jock.
Yeah. Not at all. The smartest people I know are athletes.
Love that.
So yeah, one concrete example. So back in the summer of 2017, I spent the entire summer with a team of professional distance runners in Flagstaff, Arizona. And the idea was kind of an experiment. Like, I'm just like this middle-aged amateur runner, and I'm just throw myself into the meat grinder with these pro athletes for 13 weeks, like pretty much doing everything they do that I can handle. And over the course, so I'm with these athletes every day, and these are people trying to go to the Olympics, right? And I've never seen so many athletes bail out of workouts. There's one guy on the team, he's finished 7th in the Boston Marathon, 2:09 marathoner, Scott Fauble. And he bailed out of an interval workout one day. And I asked him, like, what happened, man? He's like, well, my sinuses, I got the sinus thing. And I know that, if I quit now, I'll be able to do Friday's workout. But if I just, pushed it through to the end, I would feel better about today, but then I might lose a week. That is smart. And it's not as easy as it sounds. Like, the amateur athletes I coach, they would have a harder time making that call because they don't have the confidence. They're like, oh, if I can't finish this workout, then I'm not as fit as I thought I was. Or maybe even I'm not as good at running as I thought, or I'm not tough, or like all this stuff that it's not really rational. It's easy to make that decision for someone else. Oh, you should bail out, live to fight another day. But when it comes to ourselves, emotions get into the mix and we tough it out, which is not always the smart thing.
All right. So I can resonate. So I just had that conversation with one of my athletes. We started up a little bit academy here where we have a half a dozen of the best in the world training with us as well. And one of the athletes was grinding through a workout, and I had the exact same conversation. It was like this idea, this mentality of I will never quit a workout is the way it's an amateur thought. That's the way amateurs think.
Right.
So I love that idea of that's smarter. What about in terms of, because again, in your world, I think this is kind of like a foregone conclusion, but in ours, this is fairly new, or maybe it's like not as commonplace. Can you talk a little bit about things like pacing? Like you said, anything past a 30 or 45 second effort which if you're running for our athletes, that would be a 100 or a 200 meter sprint, or you're doing some sort of like super quick barbell cycling type thing. But once you get towards a 500 meter row, a 400 meter run, Fran, one of our workouts, anything, even in that 90-second or above, it takes a certain level of control. It takes a certain level of smarts. What does that look like? And why is that the case?
Yeah, to your point, there's really fascinating research that was done involving cheetahs, which obviously they're hunters on the African savanna. They're runners, right? And they hunt? Antelope. So biologists have like studied like their hunting habits and found that they have a sense of pacing. So they will tend to they're able to judge how fast they can go, how fast the antelope can go, how much ground they have to cover, and what the likelihood is that they'll be able to catch the antelope without giving up too much effort. And what they found was that their longest successful hunts tended to be that they knew when to give up a hunt, and the younger cheetahs did not. So the younger cheetahs would have more failed hunts that lasted longer because they didn't know when to give up, which is just, it's not a good survival thing because you're wasting energy. And then, you end up exhausted and then hungrier, but you didn't get your food. But the thing that a cheetah can't do, and also, why does horse racing require a jockey? Because neither cheetahs nor horses or any animal really other than humans can judge abstract distances. So, if you line up, again, to go back to my marathon metaphor, when you start off a 26.2 mile road race, you can't see the darn finish line. Right. Like a cheetah or a horse could absolutely not. The cheetah has to see the antelope, or at least smell it. But we, if through familiarization, we know how long that is, and then how long it's going to take, and how we have to pace ourselves. And it comes through experience, but there is a form. The same reason a horse can't do it is the reason a really dumb runner can't do it either. Like, you have to. It's actually math. What was it, 2 weeks ago that the NASA landed that probe on Mars, and they said that I don't know how many million miles away it is from Earth, and they got this thing to land. The target landing spot was like the size of a dinner plate, and they nailed it from so many million miles. That's actually what pacing a marathon is. It's that hard to do it perfectly. It's that precise, and it's not something a horse or a cheetah or even an inexperienced runner can do. Like, you have to be smart, but it's mathematics, but it's a perceptually based math. Like, if you're 11.33 miles into the race, you need to know, is my level of exertion right now appropriate for 11.33 miles into a 26.2 mile race? And a smart, experienced, good pacer knows that, and they know exactly how they should be feeling at that point. And it's not easy.
So, yeah, to the point of it not being easy, how does somebody hone that skill? Is it through more racing? Is it through just more awareness? Is it training at race pace? What's the suggestion there?
There's no substitute for experience. There's been plenty of research showing that there's a familiarization process. Like, there's one study, I think I cited it, maybe I did, in How Bad You Want It, where they had two groups of cyclists on their stationary bikes, and they were doing a simulated time trial. One group was told the distance ahead of time. The other group was not. So it was kind of like a little bit like CrossFit, except they were blinded all the way through. Yeah. They were never at any point told how long the time trial was. So obviously the cyclists who knew, so they repeated it 4 times. The cyclists who knew the distance up front and also got feedback as they were performing it, their performance, as you would expect, was the same in all 4 trials because they weren't getting fitter. There was separation so they could recover. But the blinded cyclists, what would you do in those circumstances? You're going to be conservative, right? Like, just in case it's much longer than it probably likely is. You're not going to start off at a sprint if it's going to be like a 10-mile time trial, whatever. So they were told that the distance would be same in all 4 trials, but they were never told what it was or given any feedback while they were doing it. But over those 4 trials, the blinded cyclists performed better and better and better until in the 4th and last one, they perfectly matched the performance of the ones who'd had information all along. So that shows 2 things: that there's no substitute for experience, and the pacing really is done by feel. Because again, the ones who were blinded, they never had data, they never had feedback, and they were still able to match the performance of. So that's it. You need experience, but I think you can accelerate the process with a kind of intentionality. And, I started running in 1983, when I was 11 years old. We didn't have all these wearables and all this technology. And now, today's athletes, especially the ones who start as adults, are so device dependent. And it really stands in the way. I mean, those things are useful, but they become a crutch, and they stand in the way of people getting attuned to their own bodies. So I work on this a lot with the athletes I coach, and I come up with little ways to sort of gamify workouts so that they're more mindful to how perception and I'll give you just one quick example. Say you're doing an interval set, and it's 10 times 1 minute, and you have a target intensity, but it's not super precise, right? It's like a narrow range that you want to hit for 10 times 1 minute. So in the first 1 minute, let's say you cover a certain distance, and then the game becomes to match that exact distance for every subsequent time trial, as long as the distance is was at the right target intensity. So the exact number doesn't really matter, but you decide it matters, and you try to lock yourself to it. And you can get scary good at this. Like, at first you're not, but you'll see the improvement. And what you're doing is you're sort of calibrating perception of effort to external reality. And that's really how you ultimately master pacing.
So 2 questions pop out of that. So when you program for athletes, is it based off of perceived rate of exertion more so than time ranges or distance ranges, or is it run to your example, if it's 4 by 300 meters or whatever it might be? I'm sorry, 10 by 300 meters, like your 1 minute thing. Is that, and that's our speed. I realize that we're not,
right.
Is that, do you say at a perceived rate of exertion of a 7.5 versus 300 meters at 57 seconds?
For that type of session, I'm more likely to give them a target time or split, but it is session specific. Like for most of the bread and butter basic aerobic training, that's perceived effort. But for because some workouts are supposed to be done at a specific race pace, right? So it could be 5 times 2 kilometers at 10K race pace. Well, you want to get practice at race pace in that example. So it really depends. Like, if it's a set of hill reps where pace kind of goes out the window a little bit, that will be RPE. So, it's situationally specific. But even when I am giving them a target pace, there's still a crucial role for RPE there. I tell athletes all the time, there's the letter of the workout and there's the spirit of the workout. When I give you target times, those are educated guesses about what's appropriate. It's important for you to know what the purpose of the session is, so that if my guesses are not good, you're able to actually discern that and make your own adjustment on the ground. Everyone I coach remotely. Like, I'm not standing at the side of the track with a stopwatch, saying, you know what, you don't have it today, let's dial it back a little bit. Like, they need to be able to make those decisions. But it's actually better if they can make those decisions for themselves. I had an athlete I coach who just did that. We have this critical velocity, which is your 30-minute sustainable speed. She was 4 days past a race, and it just turned out she wasn't fully recovered, wasn't quite ready. The number I gave her, I thought, was a little conservative, accounting for it, but she had a little more fatigue in her legs left over from the event than she thought. ran one interval at the goal pace, practically died doing it, and just was able to make that adjustment. And for me, like that as a coach, that makes me happier than someone who treats the target time like gospel and practically kills themselves to hit the time no matter what.
That's what we were talking about earlier with the smart athlete, and willing to be able to make the adjustments and not necessarily just be so bullheaded that it's that you're just following the letter of the workout. I love the letter versus the spirit. Right. That's really really cool language. I'm stealing, and I just I give you credit 3 times, and then after that it's mine.
Fair enough. Most of my ideas are stolen.
That's all we do, right? Yeah, you just put it through your own. It's your own. You grab them from everywhere. Speaking of that, actually is the title of the book, that we're referring to, the one that how bad do you want this? I really resonate with this idea of at some point during this training session or during this race, consciously or subconsciously, that question is going to pop in your head, and it's going to be, how hard are you willing to push through this? And I like the idea. I think it's, your words are somewhere along the lines of like, can you make this bigger than it is? Can you almost like trick yourself? I don't know if it's trick yourself. Can you give yourself a purpose beyond this? If it's just like, so I can do it, that might not be enough. But if you like, my livelihood depends on this, it's my reputation, this means everything to me. I think that's really cool. But I'm also interested in, because there's this other aspect you have in the book, which is like let it go. Like it doesn't matter that much. Like the example of the triathlete that put all this pressure on her, and then she went to the mountains, and the coach was like, just do more and more and more. So how do those two principles kind of like work together? Like it matters so much versus like, let it go and be light about it.
Yeah, it's a great question. And that gets exactly to the idea that there's more than one tool. And sometimes like there could be 2 tools that seem like they contradict each other. Right. Like, wait a minute, how could both of those tools
like, be distracted, but be focused? Like that.
Right, exactly. But it's really true. So on the motivational side, I would say, the more, and I'll just go with my race example, the more the stakes of a race feel like life and death to you, literally life and death, the harder you're going to be able to push. So, I mean, in point of fact, you actually can't trick yourself. Like, well, God bless you if you can, I guess, but I don't think many people can in that way. But what most people end up doing is and you sort of hinted at this, they connect. The race becomes symbolic of their deepest values. So for me, it was, and I get into this in the book. I talk about my own struggles with mental fitness. Like I was a classic head case as a high school runner. And I was weak. I thought of myself as a coward. Like I used that exact word. That's what I called myself. And so for me, like finishing races, knowing I had left it all out there, became my way of bootstrapping toward becoming the man I wanted to be. Like I wanted to change. I didn't want to run a faster marathon. I wanted to change how I viewed myself.
I love that.
And that mattered a lot. And it really got me to invest myself in the process. What's a little bit different from that, and it's a different tool, but the same athlete can use both of them, is not actually having how you view yourself dependent on formal success. So, what happened with Siri Lindley is like, it's, she choked. She became a choker because if she couldn't qualify for the Olympic team, she thought no one would respect her, or she wouldn't respect herself. But that's different because it's making how you view yourself dependent on things you actually can't control. Like, if three better athletes than you show up and execute, hey, you're not going to the Olympics, and you may have had the best race you could possibly do. So two different things. And they look like a contradiction until you really drill down and see, oh yeah, no, they're not quite. So what you see with champions all the time is like when they get to that point where like, hey, I know I'm great. they can set a goal, to win the championship, but they can also just, they know they're great whether they win or lose. You know what I mean? So it's like they want it, but they can also just have sort of a light grasp on that goal. I love how, like, when locker room reporters talk about, say before the NBA championships, they're like, we just got back from the Lakers locker room and I can tell you they're loose. Like, what does that mean? It means exactly that. Like, do they not want to win? Do they not care? Is that why they're joking around? No, they know they're great. They want to win just as much as the less experienced team that they're going to beat, 4-1. But they're like, we're great no matter what, and we can have fun. We can actually want it really bad and also have this kind of light grasp on the goal.
So, so that gets me so excited. So I love this. What we believe is the foundation of athletic development is the development of your character. And that doesn't mean like you're polite at the dinner table and you walk old ladies across the street. It means that you truly know who you are. It's like this self-mastery aspect to it. And the words that you're giving me, which I'm really excited about, is that when you can turn it into a life or death thing, you will push harder. You will stay on the coals longer. But the life or death thing is not, am I going to win the championship or not? It's like, am I going to solidify my own view of myself? And if you're trying to prove to yourself that you're going to see yourself through a prism other than the coward, like, that means a lot. And you will go through a lot of quote unquote pain, uncomfortability, discomfort, whatever it is, if it means that much to you. And one of the things we talk about with our athletes, and I regrettably actually wrote a chapter about this in my book, saying that passion was one of the tenets that's responsible for all great athletic achievement. And I've since realized it's not. It's passion is like the price of admission. Like passion is when people are excited for you. Like, Matt, I'm so happy that you found your passion, that you're writing books about endurance. Like passion. Whereas obsession is where people like get worried about you. Like they're like, Matt, like you're tipping over the edge, bro. Like all you do is talk about this like pain cave stuff. And it's like, we're worried about you and all you're doing is running. Like, well, that's what the greats do, right? The Kobe Bryants and the Michaels and the Phelpses and all those guys. This level of obsession, I love the idea of this obsession to prove to yourself, and it becomes a matter of life or death, that I am the type of person that, and that becomes the pass fail. That becomes the thing we're chasing, and that's the thing that keeps us on the coals. When we walk through it in that perspective, you say it's kind of like you kind of can become light because it's within your control now, and you can be in the Lakers locker room and they're so light, and that looks like confidence. What's your take? What's your how do you define confidence, and how do you talk with your athletes about confidence?
I think the biggest misconception about confidence is that you can manufacture it. And what you see all the time when you actually look at confident athletes is that confidence is almost always realistic. So you have to prove to yourself that you can do something to be confident that you can do it. You can't be so confident that you can fly that you can go up to the roof of your building, jump off and fly. So so there are two levels to it. So, evidence is the foundation of confidence. So, as a coach, what I do with athletes is that I try to, yes, I'm training them physically, but also I view especially every key workout as an opportunity to build their confidence. And that's why I really don't like to set athletes up for failure, because is it the end of the world if you have a disappointing workout? No. But if you have too many, you don't have enough success experiences like to build confidence as you go. So you have to push hard and you have to risk failure, but you also want to set athletes up for consistent success, because then they're proving to themselves that they can do whatever it is that they end up wanting to do. Now, what you will see is that to a limited extent, you can manufacture confidence. So if you have, like, say, two athletes and they've both had the same level of success in their training, one of them might gain more confidence out of the same experiences than another. And that's where you get into, like, sort of the pure mindset aspect of confidence. Like, what you see with, especially, like, the champion's mind type of athletes, is that they shrug off their disappointments. But all they're really doing there is being more realistic. Like, I tell athletes all the time, you can't get lucky in a workout. You should judge your fitness. You should judge your ability by your best workouts, not by your most recent failure, because you can't outperform your physical ability. You just can't. So it's actually your best workout that shows you how fit you are. So honestly, if you have 3 bad workouts and 1 good one, ignore the bad 3 workouts. Wow. Because, like, you couldn't have done that best workout if you weren't physically capable of doing it. Like, I mean, it wasn't a miracle. Right. You didn't get lucky. Like, your body had the capability to do that. And that's what you see the champions do. Like, again, you don't want to have 3 bad workouts for every good one, but the people who gain the most confidence out of the same training, they understand that, and it's not a matter of, like, being like sort of blindly optimistic. It's actually true. It's actually just realistic. It's like, I couldn't have done that unless I was capable of it. So who cares about, tomorrow's bad workout?
So, so these key workouts, can you just, from a coaching perspective, like, how often do you program key workouts? When you say you're setting people up for success on them, does that mean that you're like not maybe tapering for them, but like making sure that people are primed and ready for them? What are key workouts? What would be an example of a key workout?
Sure. Yeah. So, in the endurance world, it's like we have this 80-20 rule where 80% of training is low intensity, 20% is moderate to high.
We could learn a lot from that, because ours is like 99 and 100 in the opposite direction. 99 to 99 to 1. Yeah.
The funny thing is, like, you can go a lot harder if you go easy most of the time. So, like me, I love running fast, but what enables me to really crush a key workout is that I spend most of my time not running fast. So it's like sort of, like, the slow stuff is the broccoli you got to eat in order to get the dessert of running fast. But anyway, so in our world, that's like the key workouts are those 20%. So, if you're like a 6 or 7 times a week athlete, where you have 6 or 7 workout training sessions per week, probably 2 of those are going to be key workouts. If you're more like
that's very consistent with what we talk about as well. Like go hard once a week type thing. Yeah. Same 1 to 2 times a week, depending on age and experience and other stuff. Okay. So with this confidence thing, it seems like there's also this other level we should be aware of, which is overconfidence and people lacking the ability to brace for workouts. And I see this a lot. Like this is the thing that, since I've read your book, has probably been the most evident thing for me, is where people they don't realize how hard it's going to be, and people can go into workouts overconfident, and then they basically it's that saying, like, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. Right. But this idea, like, of understanding how hard the effort's going to be is so beneficial to your performance coming out of it.
Yeah. I think that this study that I'm about to describe came out after that book came out, I believe, but there was a great study on that phenomenon where they had people, I think it was like hold a plank for time. Like it was like hold a plank as long as you can. And before they had people do it twice. And before the first one, they had people. They asked like, how long do you think you can hold this plank? And so everyone made their guesses, and then they sort of correlated people their sort of what they thought they could do with what they could actually do, and then they got a chance to repeat it. The ones who had like a little bit of self-doubt going into it were actually the ones who improved the least or changed the least from the first plank to the second. So you had you had some who thought, oh, I can only hold a plank 2 seconds, and maybe they could hold it a lot longer than that. And you had some who were like, oh, I could hold a plank for 24 hours, and then they only hold it for 2 seconds. And then some were like really close. And the ones who were really close changed the least from the first to the second. And what that study showed is that if you basically you'll never try harder than when you expect to be trying as hard as you can. So if you're overconfident, what you walk into is a situation where like, oh my God, like I'm a little out of my depth here. Like I thought I could hold this plank for 24 hours and like it ain't going to happen. So what happens is it doesn't really matter how long you can hold the plank. It's like, can you actually stay on the coals longer? Like, can you actually perform closer to your limit? And people who are overconfident, that's the problem, is that when it starts to get hard, they crumble. Whereas if you have a little bit of self-doubt, like realistic self-doubt, then you're like, well, I'm ready for a challenge.
I love that.
And so that those people, they ended up performing the same in the first and the second one because they had actually tried harder in the first one because they had a little bit of self-doubt, realistic self-doubt.
Yeah, I love the I'm ready for a challenge type thing. One of our sayings is, expect adversity and expect to overcome it, because we want you to know that this is going to be hard. Like our sport is hard. Like, hi, it's hard. And what I've seen is like, even like the super highest level. And so we had a stage 1 of the CrossFit Games last year was done because of COVID protocols in people's gyms. And the hardest workout of the whole thing was this workout called Friendly Fran. And we had an athlete that watched other people that did not make the games do the workout. And the people that they watched went unbroken and crushed it. So because of that, so in your world, it would be like, imagine like they were doing this really hard course and they ran it in, sub 5-minute miles. So they're like, oh my gosh, I'm here. I qualify for this. I know I'll be able to do it for faster than they did it. And when this athlete got into it, it was so much harder than they expected that even though they had the capacity to do that, I don't want to say melted, but so drastically underperformed because they weren't ready for it, because they undershot the difficulty of the task.
Right.
Yeah. As people become more, and you've used the word a couple times now of like aware, like in the intention aspect, but as people become more aware of this fire walking mentality, so I kind of experienced this myself, is when I read the book a little bit, it's like you get really fired up. Like you get really fired up, like, all right, like, 'cause you get a lot of this extrinsic motivation, and you get kind of like, I want to be this mental beast. I want to be like all the people that you reference. Is there kind of the opposite of like a Dunn-Kruger effect, where you like, now that there's so much awareness to this, like you see the gap between where you're jumping off the coals and your possibility, that actually like there's this, it almost exemplifies how the gap gets even bigger in the beginning.
Right. That's entirely possible. Like that's not the feedback I get.
So I've seen with a couple of my athletes that are mentally tough, that are very mentally tough. We expose them to more awareness about mental toughness, and in the short term, they get mentally weaker.
Yeah. I mean, I believe it. I mean, I wouldn't call you a liar anyway. But yeah, I mean, I see the potential for that. I mean, ultimately, ultimately, like there are no quick fixes anyway. So, you know, as just a matter of principle, I'm a believer that reality is always the way. Like the truth will. There's no substitute. Like no matter where you're trying to get to as an athlete, you want to know the way things are. Even if it's bad news, there might be a short-term hit, but in the long run, you're better off just. I'll give you a weird example. Like I wrote this book years ago called Racing Weight, and it was about like performance weight management for endurance athletes. And so I wrote it years ago. Actually, it's my all-time best-selling book. But there's no way I could get that book published today because there's so much backlash against like, you know, focusing and it's most of it is very well intentioned, but like, you know, people being too focused on, you know, weight and appearance and like, you know, under eating is a huge problem in endurance sports. And so now weight management in endurance sports has become kind of a third rail. Like, oh, we don't talk about that. And to me, that's not right. You know what I mean? It's like, yeah, there's a bit of a Pandora's box when you address that subject, but I don't think you're doing anyone a service by pretending that weight doesn't matter. It does matter. You know, there are just healthy and unhealthy ways to go about it. And there are some people, like, given their psychology or vulnerabilities, they just need to not go there. But it doesn't mean we should not allow anyone to talk about it. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
I just think that's true for
we talk about that in our sport as well. Even like we talk about ideal body fat percentages and the optimum weight. We have the same conversations. And there's this unsaid like, like stay away from that. But I love it. And that's it's this idea that other people so I alluded to it. We've started an academy where we have some of the best athletes in our sport in the world training together. And people have been so kind of concerned, myself included, about how this dynamic is going to work. And you reference a thing called the group effect. And everyone in our sport knows this as well, but I'd love to hear your some more context on it. But in our sport, it's the reason that we train even at the novice level, we train in groups. Like there's no one-on-one CrossFit training, very, very little. It's mostly for special populations, but our dynamic, we know it works best when it's done in groups. And it's this idea that if you're pulling on a rower and you're rowing a 5K, when the coach walks behind you and they see the monitor, everyone's pace ticks a little bit faster because there's eyeballs on you. Can you give a little more context to what the group effect is and why it's such a psychological performance enhancer?
Yeah, I mean, you know, human beings are social animals, and you know, some of us might like to think that we're islands. You know, we're not influenced by other people, but we are. And I think I think most people buy it. You know, that you can perform better in a group context than you can alone. But I think a lot of people assume that the mechanism is entirely competitive in nature, that, you know, when you're in a group and you know how you measure up against people around you, you're motivated, you know, to stay on the coals a little longer, dig a little deeper. And that's absolutely true. But there's actually a second mechanism that's almost the opposite, which is a cooperative element. And I think I described a study in that book about behavioral synchrony. I'm pretty sure. And that involved rowers, actually, where they found that rowers who did like solo ergometer time trials and then repeated the same time trial in a group, exactly the same time trial, not only did they perform better in the group context, but they did a pain test. There are various experimental ways to induce pain that don't actually hurt you. They don't like hit you over the head with a hammer.
Hit you over the hand.
And they actually, they actually, a lot of them are cold water immersion.
Yeah, I've seen like put your hand in the ice bucket one. Yeah.
Right,
yeah.
Exactly. But the rowers actually felt less pain after the group time trial. And that's because of endorphin release in the group context. So part of it is actually that, like, when that behavioral synchronous thing, like anytime you do something at the same time other people around you are doing it, even if it's not competitive in nature, you release happy chemicals in your brain, and so you're able to. That's one of those things that actually makes any given level of effort feel easier. So the competition side makes you go deeper and willing to suffer more, and then the cooperative side actually makes you actually suffer less, or feel less exertion at any given level of output.
So if you want to suffer more, find a buddy.
Yeah. There you go.
All right. I think that's a great spot to wrap this up. Matt, I really appreciate it. Matt's got a whole bunch of books, more than 4, I realized after he said that. But he also preaches in, a whole bunch of different subjects. I know you're really big into, as you talked about, the weight management and nutrition side of endurance training. And certainly more than just the psychological aspect, but certainly for anyone that's listened to this podcast for a while knows how much we talk about mindset and the power of mindset and how it is the base of all. Forget about athletic performance. It is in terms of happiness, fulfillment in our lives, that's where it kind of the root of it all begins. So if you haven't read it already, check it out. It's How Bad Do You Want It? Matt, where else can people find you?
My personal website is mattfitzgerald.org. My online training business is called 80/20 Endurance, 80/20endurance.com. And then I'm on all the usual social media sites.
Well, Matt, really appreciate it. And that's hopefully we get you back on and talk about some of your other work, including the nutrition stuff.
Sounds good. I enjoyed it.
You can get every episode of Chasing Excellence wherever you listen to your podcasts or on YouTube. Until next time, thank you for listening.